In recent years, the Academy Awards have been pretty much a joke.
There's a mistake. Moonlight, you guys won Best Picture.
Less and less viewers are tuning in and taking them seriously. While it's easy to write off the Academy Awards, it's important to recognize their importance. Recognition from the Academy helps a filmmaker secure funding for new projects and promotes their films. There are 9 films up for Best Picture this year, and here are my thoughts on all of them. Ford v Ferrari is fine. The conflict in the film is mostly born out of the struggle between people and committees. The theme is that unique and talented individuals will always be better than a committee, which is pretty rich coming from a Disney film. If you made this exact movie about the production of Solo or Ant-Man, Disney would be the villains. For something that champions taking risks, Ford v Ferrari feels like a cookie-cutter biopic watered down to capture the widest audience possible. The characters are fairly one-dimensional, with everyone either being a generic good person or a generic bad person with no real middle area. The character that Matt Damon plays was married 7 times in real life, however that might add too much depth to his character and is completely ignored. None of the conflicts in the first 2 acts hold any real weight. Every conflict that arises is solved through persuasive speech as seen later. Christian Bale's character seriously gets fired like 3 times and is rehired in the next scene each time. There are only a few issues I take with the presentation of this film. For some reason, most of the scenes have a vignette filter over them, and it's seriously distracting for the entire runtime. This effect is mostly used to draw viewers' attention to the center of a frame, but center framing is hardly used in these scenes, so it just comes off as distracting. Once you notice it, it is impossible to stop thinking about. The best aspect of this film are the racing sequences. These sequences were very well executed and edited. You can tell there was serious coordination and planning and live-action effects involved. The stress and pressure of racing is very well translated as well, especially in the 3rd act, and is one of the redeeming features this movie has. Sadly, these scenes only make up about 30 minutes of the 2.5-hour runtime. The other 2 hours don't feel entirely necessary, and there are certainly parts that could have been shaved off. Once you see the general direction the film is headed in, the sequence of events becomes pretty clear up until the 3rd act when things actually pick up. Overall, the movie's fine. It's nothing really special, and it's nothing offensively horrible. It's a standard formulaic Disney sports movie with some above-average racing sequences. This shouldn't be in consideration for Best Picture, and is what I feel to be the most undeserving of the nominees. And I'm giving it a 5 out of 10. The Irishman is a film that I actually really enjoy. The film never lost my attention despite its 3.5-hour runtime. The acting is really solid all around, with Robert De Niro giving a great performance that unfortunately wasn't nominated. Both Al Pacino and Joe Pesci are nominated deservingly in supporting roles. The Irishman is my second choice for adapted screenplay behind Little Women. There's some pretty great costume and production design to be found, but more importantly I find it's the visual effects nomination. Netflix created new camera systems and technology in order to create the de-aged face effects. The absence of tracking markers meant performances could be given more naturally, and overall the effect works really well for the massive runtime given. While I understand the de-aging effects didn't work for everyone, I certainly wouldn't be upset if this won the visual effects category. This, along with Marriage Story, have helped bring Netflix to an unprecedented 24 Oscar nominations this year. The only nomination I feel is unjustified is cinematography. Much of the film just looks really ugly, and you can tell where some compromises were made in order to have better lighting for the de-aged faces. Still, this is one of my favorite of the nominees, and I wouldn't be upset if it won. 8 out of 10. Jojo Rabbit is a film that I have very mixed feelings about. On a technical level, this movie is just fine. There are some gorgeous shots to be found, but the majority of the movie is shot like a sitcom. Roman Griffin Davis is pretty great for a child actor, with the rest of the cast ranging from serviceable to bad. A staggering amount of the film feels entirely derived from Wes Anderson features. My mixed feelings on the film come very much from the screenplay, a category in which this film is also nominated. Jojo Rabbit is a very surface-level satire, with the deepest commentary being that maybe Nazis are bad and Jews might be good. As it turns out, Sam Rockwell's character is gay and fighting against his own people, and that is used as a punchline and nothing else. Scarlett Johansson doesn't deserve her nomination for actress in a supporting role whatsoever. This movie is so tone-deaf to the material that it is attempting to play on and comes across as incredibly insulting to that real-life material. The film constantly switches from comedy to drama, and it only works once or twice. That being said, the comedy works much better in this film for me than Taika Waititi's previous works, and is something I really enjoyed when it did land. Overall, this film is too charming for me to really dislike it. That being said, I also don't believe it deserves a single one of the nominations it's been given. 6 out of 10. Joker hilariously has more Oscar nominations than any other film this year, with nominations for Best Actor, Cinematography, Costume Design, Directing, Film Editing, Makeup and Hairstyling, Original Score, Sound Editing and Sound Mixing, and Adapted Screenplay. My interest in it came from the controversy coming around the time of its premiere. The media frenzy that was occurring turned out to be much more entertaining than the film itself. I enjoyed it when it came out, but this is one of those films that falls apart when you actually start to think about it. This film has one of the worst screenplays of the year, lacking significant social commentary and logic overall. The argument made by the makeup and hairstyling team is that Joaquin Phoenix was so difficult and unpredictable on set that they deserve a nomination. There had to be multiple microphones at all times, as none of the crew knew how loud Joaquin would get during his performance. Apparently, multiple scenes were improvised on set, such as Joker getting in the refrigerator. The cinematography was pretty great for it being a superhero movie, but that's still a pretty low bar to clear. Just because your movie looks like a serious movie doesn't mean it deserves an Oscar nomination for cinematography. The only 2 nominations that I feel this film deserves are for its fantastic score and Best Actor for Joaquin Phoenix. This isn't Phoenix's best performance, but it is still good nonetheless, and I'm glad the Academy is finally recognizing his work. 6 out of 10. Little Women is genuinely fantastic. Everything about the film comes together so perfectly to deliver a beautiful and joyous experience. Greta Gerwig was sadly snubbed for a Best Director nomination. This film has 3 nominations for Best and Supporting Actress, which are all very well deserved. There's only one technical flaw I take with this wonderful film. In some scenes, the ADR is atrocious, with words coming from characters without their mouths actually moving. This wasn't a huge issue, but certainly something that could have been improved. Still, Little Women is an absolutely amazing experience. So full of joy and life and heartbreak, this film manages to make you understand and care about a significant number of characters. I fully believe this film deserves every single nomination it was given. 9 out of 10. Marriage Story is another nominee that I absolutely love. I made a video already about this film, so if you want my full thoughts, look there, but I'll briefly recap what I said. Everything in Marriage Story feels real, the world feels lived in, and the characters of Charlie and Nicole are very well fleshed out. Everything that happens occurs naturally and isn't reliant on plot conveniences. There was also quite a bit to appreciate here on a filmmaking level. The use of color in the film is superb, and there are a number of long takes to appreciate as well. Every nominated performance in this film deserves it, and the editing is fantastic enough that I think it should win. This film is great, it's on Netflix, so check it out if you haven't. 9 out of 10. "1917 is easily the most overrated Best Picture nominee. I'm not saying that this is a bad film exactly, but people are hailing it as some masterpiece, which it is not anywhere close to. Apart from production design, this doesn't deserve any of the nominations it was given. The cinematography in 1917 was by Roger Deakins. Now, Roger Deakins is a phenomenal cinematographer. Every film I've seen from him is beautiful and often breathtaking. Blade Runner 2049 is the most visually stunning film I've seen in my entire life. Deakins has been snubbed by the Academy 13 times, with his work finally being recognized in 2018 for his work on Blade Runner. This brings us to 1917. The issue I take is that 1917 has some of the most bland visuals I've seen all year. That's not to say I don't like any of it. There are two sequences that are very visually engaging. The battle that was heavily showcased in the trailers and the church sequence were both great, and you can really sense Deakins' involvement. However, most of the rest of the movie is shot fairly blandly, following two characters walking along in the mud. Before I go any further, I should address the gimmick that this movie is built around. 1917 is made to look like it is all one shot. Unfortunately, this effect is somewhat ruined by the fact that every single cut in the movie is incredibly obvious. The camera will pan around a boulder, or someone will pass by the camera every time it happens. Once you notice this, it becomes impossible to not spot it every time it happens, which is every 3 to 5 minutes. The makeup and hairstyling in this film wasn't great either. While all of the extras were made to look like they were actually in a war, our two leads looked like they had just gotten makeup applied, and their faces were really clean for the situation they were in, which was war. Every time something happens that causes a character to get dirty, they return to being completely clean minutes later. The production design is the one aspect that I really enjoy from this movie. There are sets and locations that look real and lived in, and are pretty fantastic. Sound editing and sound mixing are often confused and often go to the same movie, as Academy voters don't know the difference between them. These tend to go to the music movies, as seen in Bohemian Rhapsody, or the loudest movies, like Dunkirk. I fully expect 1917 to win both these categories, even if it doesn't deserve it. The sound editing and sound mixing weren't anything great, but they weren't anything special either. This is unlike a standout example earlier this year of Uncut Gems, which had phenomenal sound editing and mixing. There are a lot of visual effects that don't really hold up in this film. There's a transition scene where a character falls down a waterfall, and it looks comically bad. This script isn't anything to write home about either. There are many plot conveniences and other issues I take with it. This certainly isn't one of the best directed films of the year. Most of the issues I've stated could be fixed by a better script or tighter directing, neither of which occurred, placing the blame on Sam Mendes. This film has a lot of issues, but I still enjoy it overall, so it's getting a positive rating. 6 out of 10. This is a very technically great film that I got nothing out of. The 9th film by Quentin Tarantino lacks any true plot. Events just happen and are simply dropped. The first hour and a half drags along painfully, with the film finally picking up with the Bruce Lee bit, which is probably my favorite scene in the whole movie. From there, it's a return to monotony up until the last 15 minutes, which are pure Tarantino awesomeness. This film is surprisingly lacking in terms of Tarantino action, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but isn't a great sign that it comes as a much-needed breath of fresh air what feels like 7 acts in. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood fails to have a conventional narrative structure, instead opting for people hanging out the entire movie. None of the subplots really lead to anything. Margot Robbie dances a comical number of times before going and seeing a movie that's better than this. As a period piece, this film is great, with its sets and dialect, with the only technical flaw I can find being with a few of the driving scenes and some of the editing. Leonardo DiCaprio deserves his Best Actor nomination, as him and the rest of the cast give a fantastic performance that serves as the lifeblood of this otherwise dull film. Brad Pitt gave a better unnominated performance in Ad Astra than he did here. It's crucial you know the story of Sharon Tate and Charles Manson before seeing this movie. This might be nice for those people who have an appreciation for the context of the story, but without, the film offers no assistance. Aside from a handful of standout scenes and the last 15 minutes, this film is mostly comprised of a disappointing nothing. Again, I didn't get much out of this film, but I can appreciate it on a technical level. 6 or 7 out of 10. Parasite is genuinely a masterpiece. This is my favorite of the nominees and my second favorite film of the year behind The Lighthouse. Parasite is nominated for Best Director, Best Editing, International Feature Film, Production Design, Original Screenplay, and it easily deserves every single one of these nominations. It makes me happy that this film is getting the recognition it deserves and is loved by so many people. The average movie-going audience is slowly learning about it. This film has made $30 million in the United States with a worldwide total of $160 million. If this won Best Picture, it would be a phenomenal achievement. And if it just wins Foreign Feature and not Best Picture, I'll be pretty disappointed. I don't want to say too much. It's best to go into this movie blind, so I'm just going to leave it at that. It's a masterpiece that's playing in theaters all around the country right now, so be sure to see it if you get the opportunity, and I'm giving it a 10 out of 10. Overall, there are 4 films that I'd be happy with winning Best Picture. Parasite, Marriage Story, Little Women, and The Irishman are all great in their own regards. And while I'd prefer Parasite to win, I'd be happy with any of these. 1917, Hollywood, Jojo Rabbit, Joker, and Ford v Ferrari would be disappointing wins. There were also a lot of snubs this year. While Knives Out has a nomination for Best Screenplay, there are plenty of nominations it could have swept up as well, for costume design and acting. Us was a fantastic horror film by Jordan Peele earlier this year, and Lupita Nyong'o's performance is one that I'd pick for Best Actress. Portrait of a Lady on Fire was ineligible for Best Picture, as each country only gets one nominee and France did not put it in for consideration. That being said, this film could pretty much sweep every single category if it had been seriously considered. Uncut Gems had some of the best sound mixing and sound editing all year, with a great performance from Adam Sandler. Dolomite Is My Name could have been nominated for makeup and hairstyling and possibly Best Actor for Eddie Murphy. Again, Brad Pitt gave a pretty great performance in Ad Astra, which thankfully is nominated in some of the sound categories. And last but not least, The Lighthouse might be the best film of the year and is sadly barely nominated for anything. I'm incredibly pleased with its nomination for cinematography, which it absolutely deserves, but still it's disappointing to see the lack of love this is getting from the Academy. So those are my thoughts on the Academy Awards. Let us know what you think about the nominations down below. Thanks for watching.